Welcome back to the Jessica Ash Wellness YouTube channel, coming to you with another episode of the Fully Nourished podcast, a place where we explore how female physiology and feminine energy dance together to shape our life experience. I'm Jessica Ash, functional nutritionist and integrative health coach, and in this podcast, you can expect both a scientific and a spiritual approach to female physiology, bioenergetics, hormones, biology, behavior change, and the female experience. You'll see how your health struggles and burnout are initiating you as a woman into a journey of deep nourishment and fulfillment. With that being said, as a reminder, everything in this podcast is for education and inspiration only and is not intended as medical advice. Please talk to the appropriate professional if necessary, and please use common sense before making any changes to your diet or lifestyle. Thank you so much for your patience while I took a break. I tried to lead by example and just remind you that it's okay to just take a break. You don't have to announce it. You don't have to apologize for it. You don't have to have this big plan for it. Sometimes there's just times where your body's like, take a break. And oftentimes I will let you in on a little secret. And this applies to creativity. This applies to tasks. This applies to so many areas of life, is the times when you feel like you have the most to do and you're the most stressed out and your to-do list is a mile long and you just feel like you're pulled in 1,000 different directions, is usually the time where you need to clear your schedule for a day and just do nothing, or whatever that looks like for you. And a lot of times we as women convince ourselves that we can't do that. We have to, I couldn't possibly do that. I couldn't possibly let them down, or I couldn't possibly this. We create all these scenarios that are about to happen if we do that. And it's fascinating to me because every time in my experience, and I promise you, 100% of the time, none of that stuff comes true. None of it. No one cares. Most people are like, yeah, whatever, it's fine. But we create these catastrophes in our mind. And I have learned to not do that, and it's been a practice over time. It's okay to just take a break when you want to take a break. Overanalyzing and overpathologizing is just withering our feminine energy up until it's just brittle dust, and it's just got cobwebs all over it, and it's just huddled in the corner. But if you got on Instagram with me a couple of weeks ago, I hyped up this idea that we're going to dive into the menstrual cycle. We're going to dive into some hormones. I dropped some really interesting information on progesterone. Over the next couple of weeks, I don't know how long this series is going to go. We're just going to go with the flow a little bit and totally on point with the topic and see where it takes us. We as women, we have this really cool ability to just, if you have a husband or you have a boyfriend or you have men in your life and they're just like, how do you know? And you're just like, I don't know. I just know. How do you know? What are the logical points? What are the bullet points of how I don't know? I just know. Because we can feel when something is right and we can feel when something is wrong. And it's not something that we can put our finger on or we can explain, but it just is, right? And when we find it, the thing that feels right, we just know, okay, this is it. This feels right. And that is a part of female physiology. We have what's called diffused awareness, where males have more focused awareness. The way that their brains work, inspired by the amount of testosterone in their body and just the way that their physiology is designed, they have this wonderful ability to have an immense amount of depth of focus on like individual things. And so they're very good at compartmentalizing and like looking at things very logically and reasonably. And when we try to do that, we really just fall flat. It stresses us the heck out. And our strength and our gift is this kind of diffused awareness where we're so sensitive, we're so based in the sensory. And you can think of it almost like a matrix. We have so many connections going on at all times, where we have all these paths that we're taking in our brain. We have this kind of diffused awareness. We're constantly scanning our environment for safety, for stability, for resources. We're always making sure we have like eyes on the back of our head, I always say we have eyes on the end of our nerve endings. Like we have eyes within, eyes without, eyes all around. And we can feel those eyes telling us what they need to tell us. This is why mastering our own internal universe is so important. And I've touched on this a little bit before, but I'm going to touch on it again because it's going to be a part of one of my upcoming trainings. But the 5 eyes of feminine wisdom are really instinct, insight, imagination, intuition, and inspiration. And so when we are in this realm of chaos where we don't have control over our bodies, we don't have control over our minds, our wills. Often this insight starts to drive us crazy. This diffused awareness starts to drive us just absolutely berserk. And it's because we are not in tune with it. Our greatest gift, our greatest strength, our sensitivity, our ability to feel, our ability to receive and accept and feel and hold space and sit with it for a moment and let go of what needs to be let go of, is no longer in rhythm. It's now starting to just culminate and accumulate. If you think of it like a tide coming in and out, women, we live in this kind of rhythmic efflorescence, which just means blooming, where we can't be in a constant state of growth. There's an ebb and flow to all things. And so if we want to continue to grow, there's kind of these cycles that take place where you'll go through a period of growing, and then you'll turn inward, and then growth and turn inward. And these are cycles and rhythms that we see reflected in nature, which we'll go over in a moment, in our menstrual cycle, in our bodies. So this goes beyond just menstruation. So if you're menopausal or you no longer cycle for any reason, this still applies to you, and I hope that you'll continue to listen, because we will get to menopause within this series, if not today, because we had many questions about it. And so with anything, your greatest strength, your greatest power can also become your greatest vulnerability and also your biggest shadow. Like, it can become not only a weakness, but it can become a weapon. And this is where we're often seeing women today. This sensitivity has become a vulnerability because it's not protected, it's not kept sacred. And then on top of it, it shows up in its most debased, darkest, shadowiest forms. And it's because anything, when not brought to the light, is going to turn into chaos. And if not chaos, we'll go one step worse and just say straight stagnation, just lack of growth, just death and decay, just lack of flow, and just starting to just stagnate, which is where a lot of women find themselves. There's such this almost like quiet desperation underneath the surface of so many women, just this suppressed rage that any little thing, they're just waiting for any little thing to give them an excuse to let some of it out, to let the steam out just a little bit, because it's killing them inside. It's stagnating, it's accumulating, it's wrecking them. And so I promise today is not philosophy. It's not a philosophical episode, but I'm talking about all of this because this applies to our menstrual cycle. Our menstrual cycle is an oracle. It's almost a song, or you can think of it like, I play classical piano and read music, so I think of it as almost as like this sheet of music that reflects rhythm that are bigger than us. And so when I was thinking about what do we want to talk about, where do we want to start, I wrote down this note and I just said, menstrual cycles follow rhythms of larger cycles, following rhythms of even larger cycles, of even larger rhythms within the maker of rhythms. That's like Inception, but I'll read it one more time. Menstrual cycles follow rhythms of larger cycles, following rhythms of even larger cycles, of even larger rhythms within the maker of rhythms. And I promise you there's a drawing that goes with that as well. I like sketched something out, and that's going to be in one of my upcoming trainings to show you all of these rhythms that are moving around. We have our menstrual cycle, or our infradian rhythm, but we also are dictated by the circadian rhythm as well. So we have the circadian rhythm, then we have the infradian rhythm, then we have, which is also the lunar rhythm, then we have the seasonal rhythms, then we have these kind of yearly rhythms where every year something shifts, and then we go on to see these bigger life cycles, these 9-year rhythms, and then of course we have the life cycle, life, death, and rebirth. There's so many rhythms and so many cycles going around and around in our body. Specifically us females, our female physiology directly reflects a lot of these rhythms, the rhythms of Mother Nature, the rhythms of our mother. And ooh, was it not a spicy week on Instagram for me saying that we as women are made in the image of God, which means that we are made in the image of Mother. And a lot of people took that many different ways. And I find it fascinating because I've touched on this before. The word God is a human conception. We have created a word to describe something that we couldn't possibly even begin to wrap our mind around. And we tend to humanize God a lot. And God is so beyond what we could even imagine. And God is not a man and he's not a woman. God is God. And everything that is created has to come from God or be a reflection of an aspect of God. All creation is a reflection of the Creator. Within him, we live and move and have our being. And so I found it really fascinating that I got so much pushback from the idea that we as women are created in the image of God, but specifically the aspect of God that is the feminine aspect, the mothering aspect, the nurturing aspect. And even deeper, if we're talking about the Judeo-Christian scriptures specifically, it's so fascinating to me that when you go to the original language, when you go to the Hebrew, when you go to the Aramaic, you can't go to the Greek because the Greek is not really the original language that Jesus was speaking in. Jesus was speaking Aramaic. Many of the apostles were speaking Aramaic. And so you really have to go to the Aramaic. But you find that the Holy Spirit is always referred to using feminine nouns. You never, ever find the Spirit referred to using masculine nouns unless you are reading the Greek, obviously, which is just a complete mistranslation. But Shekinah glory, this pillar of light that surrounds God, feminine. Ruach, the Holy Spirit, feminine. It's undeniable that there's a huge portion of God's essence, the nurturing, the presence of God, right? The part of God that is interceding on our behalf to the Father, that helps speak to us in groanings that we cannot understand and aligns us with the will of God. That is our mother. She is our sustenance. She is our source. She is what brings us into life and escorts us into death. She is where we get everything, our body, our bones, everything. It is our mother. And if you are interested in learning more about this, there's many papers out there and things. I'll link a paper that's really interesting to show when the feminine aspects of God started to be removed in the early churches, I think around the 4th century. It was pretty much well understood and then started getting lost, but a lot of rabbis carried on the tradition for a long time and still do. But because I can't help myself, we do have to wonder and ask the question of what really occurs when you remove such a powerful aspect of God's essence from human consciousness, the nurturing, the presence, the personal nitty gritty, almost bloody primal nature of a mother that is just so in love with her child that she will do anything. She will lay down her life. When you remove that from the human consciousness, especially I think it affects men and women differently. It's going to affect us both. For men, it's going to create a level of brutality because we've talked about it in a past episode where we talked about the anima and the animus, where women and the influence of the feminine on men gives them that anima, as Carl Jung calls it, where it's really their ability to love. It's their ability to love themselves. It's their ability to love and nurture their families, the loyalty, the love. And obviously we know that this is something that is really missing from a lot of men's hearts. It's been removed. And then for women, I see this, is when you remove that aspect from God's nature from human consciousness, you make women forget how to nurture properly. They forget that their underlying purpose is nurturance of themselves, nurturance of others, this nurturing part of us that fills us so deeply. It's so fulfilling to nurture. Not just children, right? Of course that's fulfilling, but nurture everything. We are all mothers. It doesn't matter if you've birthed a child or not. You are a physical reflection of mother, and you lose the family aspect of God's nature. It works in perfect harmony together. It takes the masculine and the feminine to bring something to fruition, to beget a son. If anyone's ever read John 3:16, and that says, the only begotten son. How do you think we beget sons? You remove the family aspect of God from human consciousness and you get to create this very authoritarian kind of dictator god that just wields his weapon over everybody. You got all these rules and guidelines and you better follow them or you're going to go to hell. Not understanding that everything around us, the whole universe, is an interaction between the mind and the spirit. God is mind and spirit. Mind is the structure, it's the laws of the universe, it's order. You cannot circumvent the laws of the universe, the order of the universe. There are laws in place and you cannot circumvent them. They are firm, they are complete, they are perfect, they are cause and effect, they are math, they are geometry, they are numbers, perfection. However, the mother inspires the mind. The spirit inspires the mind, right? Just how the feminine inspires the masculine into action. And so the masculine is largely passive, right? It puts its order into place, structure is formed, and then it just goes and goes. But the feminine takes this frame and the structure and starts to animate it and bring life and love and nurturance and family and beauty and creativity to it. And that's really the cycle of life. It is this cycle of life. And when you remove this from human consciousness, you remove women's purpose. They forget who they are. They forget the mirror that their body is. Their mirror is reflecting this aspect of God, this complexity of God's essence, truly. And not only do I feel like you spit in the face of God, but you also almost create just kind of chaos. Nobody knows who they are anymore. And I mean, it's 2024. Take a look around. We are here. We have arrived. We have arrived here. Okay? And nobody knows who they are. Nobody knows what gender they are. Like, we do not know. We think men and women are interchangeable, but they're obviously very much not. And so men have lost all of their purpose, just become passive and withdrawn and addicted to anything they can get their hands on because they just are dying of quiet desperation and needing to be put on testosterone by the time they're 23 and TRT themselves out of it. And women are acting psychopathic, like rage-filled control freaks going down crazy rabbit holes constantly, drowning not only themselves but also their families in their utter misery. And for good reason, right? Like, we feel like we have breadwinner blues. We do all of the work in the family, all of the work out of the home. We're also the breadwinners. It's chaos. It's absolute chaos. This is what occurs when we start to remove things just slowly, lies by omission, right, from human consciousness. And we have arrived. This episode is sponsored by Subluna. Subluna is an herbal wellness company focused on the journey back to nature and ourselves through premium herbal formulations, natural hair care, and functional beverages that actually taste good. Their mushroom latte mixes are all the rage right now for good reason, especially their Cool Girl Matcha, which is the matcha for people who don't like matcha. It's designed to support the goal of graceful aging and features a sneaky ingredient, tremella mushroom, that helps the body make its own hyaluronic acid. And even cooler, all their latte mixes, the rosemary cacao, the golden milk, and the matcha, of course, have pastured egg yolk powder as an ingredient to make the texture creamy and give it a little boost of nourishment. I want to start touching on the menstrual cycle. And before we over pathologize and data it and say, okay, this is where the numbers need to be, and this is where the progesterone needs to be, and the estrogen, and the this and the that, we need to remember to ground ourselves a little bit before we dive in. I think right now we're in this state where we're trying to just hack the heck out of our bodies as women, and it's not working. We try to get the data points, and we try to track the cycles and have the graphs, and we try to have the boxes, the cycle syncing boxes with modern cycle syncing, where it's, okay, when you're bleeding, you do this, and in your second half of your follicular phase, you do this, and when you're ovulating, you do this, and you eat this, and it's, oh my gosh, it's just too much. And I was just perusing, I was perusing the internet, and sometimes I find the most random things, and I'm like, it can only be divinely inspired, because I don't know how I came across this little article, and it's only 3 paragraphs, so I'm just going to read it to you because I found it so fascinating. And it's called, and I love the way that this is explained. I'm going to use this moving forward, but it's written by a man named Adam Blanning, and it says, the menstrual cycle as a breathing process. Sometimes the most beautiful and important part of our physiology is flexibility. Can we shift and change ourselves? We do, of course, carry this out all the time, for when we take in a breath, we open ourselves to the world around us. Rudolf Steiner actually pointed out that we are much more intimately related to our environment through respiration than through digestion or touch. Then, when we breathe out, we cut ourselves off from the outside world and release what we do not need anymore: carbon dioxide, nitrogen, etc. This is a very regular and familiar cycle, one which we generally carry out 16 to 24 times a minute. But there are other ways that we breathe too. The menstrual cycle can be understood as one such kind of respiration, one that brings aspects not just of inside and outside, but also life and death, generosity and loss. Now, clearly not everyone is connected to this breathing rhythm. A male body is too solid, too connected to the earth to maintain the flexibility needed for this kind of receptivity and release. Even if a male body had the right organs for pregnancy, it would be a question as to whether there could be space created for a new being, a child, to come into existence. The female body is different, with an inherent physiologic generosity that makes it possible for there to be a pregnancy, to live more between the heavens and the earth, to become receptive, but that opening gesture is not always automatic. Sometimes the body knows that such generosity is not possible or inappropriate, such that with conditions of very low body weight through vigorous exercise and very limited nutrition, or significant stress, then one or multiple cycles may be skipped. This can be understood as the body's way of showing that there is not enough vitality to maintain both oneself and another. A successful pregnancy in a certain way depends on bounty. It also depends on a certain softening and surrender. One example of this is when a couple tries very hard to get pregnant, sometimes with sheer determination, sometimes through fertility treatments, but is unsuccessful. Then once they give up, relax, surrender, and decide it won't work, or adopt a child, then the pregnancy comes. And pregnancy itself brings many shades of softening: the loosening of joints, a surrender of strict immunologic defenses, slower movement, and a baby brain. To become pregnant, there has to be some loss of self, and we can find examples of that bounty in the natural world. After pregnancy, in contrast, there has to be a certain process of refinding, rebuilding oneself. After giving myself away on so many levels, how do I claim my body just for me? That process also needs to happen when periods are too close together, or too heavy, or last too long. Then, in some way, the gesture of letting go through menstrual bleeding becomes dominant, and there is not enough time to build oneself up again between periods. If this becomes a consistent pattern, the resulting anemia brings weakness and fatigue. There's commonly also an accompanying loss of boundary, in some way giving oneself away with such generosity that we lose a healthy sense of self. Then we need to find the healthy boundary and close ourselves off to the world. There is a related larger shift that many women experience at menopause, when a new experience or awareness of self emerges, often on a social or community, artistic, or spiritual level, because the forces which have previously, repeatedly been given outside of oneself are now available inwardly. Then the bounty of forces needs a new direction. Those forces of vitality may not even know quite where to go, and so they overfill from the inside with warmth, hot flashes. This may continue until a new balance is found between inside and outside, between physically mothering, which is premenopausal, and spiritually nurturing, postmenopausal. It is a doorway out of physiologic devotion, but with the possibility for new wisdom. It is possible to pathologize or make into an illness all of these processes, to view them as something which is too often wrong and needs to be controlled. Hormonal methods are effective but dictate rhythms from the outside. It is possible to balance this breathing in its many different forms, to balance how we breathe from the inside. I'll link the article for you in the show notes if you want to read it for yourself, but I thought that was a beautiful way to open this discussion and really start to visualize and see the process of menstruation or going through this rhythm as a deeper reflection of this taking in and this breathing out. I feel like breathing is such a beautiful way to describe it, because I have always described it as this reflection of this kind of life, death, rebirth cycle. I know some people look at it as seasons, where when we're bleeding, it reflects our inner winter. And then as we move into the second half of the follicular phase, that first half of the cycle, then we see it as more of a spring, everything's coming to life. Then ovulation is often seen as summer, abundance, fertility, and then the luteal phase is seen as an autumn, or like a moving towards death or moving towards winter, and then, if the cycle repeats itself again. How I like to look at the menstrual cycle is a little bit twofold, and I hope you can visualize this in your mind, so I'll go slow, but I like to actually separate the menstrual cycle into two parts. So I like to see as, and I guess it's interesting because I've never thought of it as breathing until I found the article, but I guess I have seen it as breathing before I even put words to it. But I've seen it as an inhale and an exhale, or the sense of there's two halves, and there's kind of two underlying purposes for the first half of the cycle and the second half of the cycle. Remember that the cervix opens 2 times during the menstrual cycle, and it opens once to release and once to take in. So it opens during our bleed, and it feels different than when it opens during ovulation. If you track your cervical position and you have touched your cervix during different parts of your cycle, then you know this. But the opening during menstruation or during our bleed is very different than the opening, the softening during ovulation to actually take in the seed of life, if we want to call it that. And so you have these kind of two pinnacles of the cycle, if you want to think of it like that. I like to see the cycle more as like this bell curve, where the peak is ovulation. That's where a lot of the energy is concentrated in the female body during that time, and we can feel it, right? We feel good, we feel alive, we feel sexy, we feel attractive, we feel all that energy accumulating. But we also feel a different type of energy accumulating during our bleed. It's a release, right? It's like all the parts of us, the dark parts of us, like we just want to listen to sad music and just, I don't want to say sit in our bad mood, but we just have very little energy for extras. Whereas 2 weeks before, we were like, yeah, let's take on the world. And this is really that inhale and exhale, where we take in the whole world and then we exhale it all. And it is a bigger reflection of life, death, and rebirth. You cannot have life without death. You cannot have light without dark. That is really what the feminine represents. It is beginning and end. It is what is and is always to come, right? It is that reflection of just cycles and cycles and cycles and cycles, and nothing gets forgotten. Everything is a part of everything, and everything is going to be transformed and alchemized into something new, and that's the only constant. But it's done in a very ordered and rhythmic and structured way. It's not pure chaos unless there's not enough energy to support it and support the structure and the form. And this is why supporting our cellular metabolism and getting to the root of metabolic health really impacts us, because that is what allows the energy and actually creates the energy to flow through our structure. And when we don't have the energy, we start to see the structure or the form start to collapse within the body. And we see this physically. Our physical structure starts to collapse. We start to get chaos in our rhythms become discombobulated. But on a bigger level, we also see this happens mentally and spiritually. We're in this constant state of collapse, and it feels we have no resilience. We have no mastery over our universe. We're just losing it. And so I think that these kind of two sections of our full infradian rhythm, our full infradian cycle, are really important to grasp before you dive into the concepts that are often found in modern day cycle syncing. This idea of like you have your menstrual phase and then your follicular phase and then your ovulatory phase. When you start to just section off the cycle like that without understanding that there's really two underlying halves or essences to the infradian rhythm or the menstrual cycle, and you have this kind of build up and then decline. And I don't even want to call it a decline, because the first half of your cycle is really supporting and focusing all of its energy towards bringing ovulation to fruition. Once ovulation occurs, then the second half is all about preparing for a potential pregnancy. The body doesn't really, they say, the body doesn't really know it's pregnant until it implants on the uterine lining about 2 to 3 weeks later. As far as your body is concerned, it's preparing for that possible pregnancy, that possible implantation to take place regardless in that second half of the cycle. And so you can see there's a very big shift in resources. And this is why we see a temperature. This is why we see a shift in physiological priorities. This is why we see a shift in the body is more efficient at burning fat in the first half of the cycle and needing a lot more carbohydrates in the second half of the cycle, a little less resilient to stress on the tail ends or the bookends of the cycle. There's a story here. And when we start to dive into the story, we start to understand not only our bodies, not only our hormones, not only ourselves. Even if you do not have this cycle, this menstrual cycle anymore, no one can take your rhythmic nature, your cyclic nature away. No one can take that away from you. It's embedded into your cells. It's your very being. No matter where you are in life and what season of life you are in, this applies to you. You can't look at one section of your life in a vacuum. You have to see the full weight of your feminine potential and who you are as a female. But what I've also found is that we can also really look to our bodies to teach us a lot about life and how to move through life. We're going to go through these stages of growth and then turning inward, or this kind of blooming and then contracting, blooming and contracting, right? It's like the ebb and flow of the tide in the ocean, or it's like the waxing and waning of the moon. There's a time for all of it. There's a time for the fullness. There's a time for the new moon. There's a time for building up to the full moon, and then there's a time for a decline to the new moon. All of it has these kind of rhythms and these patterns. And when we can fully accept that this is our rhythm, that there's nothing else we can do, that we have to surrender. This is what when you hear surrendering to the flow means. I think sometimes a lot, especially in the divine feminine space, and some people, I'm sure some of you think I'm crazy and woo-woo, but sometimes I read some of this stuff and I'm like, this stuff sounds crazy. And it makes no sense, because if you don't have someone to just sit there and explain that, and sometimes it just has to be felt, right? You'll read something and be like, that just went way over my head. Like, I don't get it. And then you feel it or you experience it and you're like, oh, now I'm starting to get this. But that's really what it means when you often hear this kind of surrender and flow and just surrender and let go. And you're like, how do I do that without just like losing it? That's the only option, because that is you. That is who you are. That is the only thing you can do. And anything else is not you. And anything else is not real. That's really it. This is the only thing that's real. That is you. And everything else is just an illusion. Everything else is just something that you're trying to be that you're not. It's like square peg round hole. And it's going to drain you. It's not natural for you. And there's a reason why it doesn't feel good to be there. And this is, of course, more of a spiritual and mental aspect of surrender and flow, but it's going to impact you in your physical bodies. And I'm so excited I'm very close to releasing my new workshop masterclass that's going to be talking about this very thing, about how the energetic rhythms affect us on a physical level, that our physical body is a direct energetic mirror. Like, your physical tissue is really just, what, if you're watching me on YouTube, you can see my hand, tissue. This is just light, really, on a fundamental subatomic level. And we are reflecting these bigger things in our physical body. And so if we don't understand this and we just keep trying to hack our bodies, and we just try to focus on the data and the hormones and the raw carrot salad and the protein, all of those things are important. Don't get me wrong, right? We need those things. We need good habits. We need good routines. We need to be supportive and nurturing. It's part of mothering ourselves, meeting our basic biological needs, which is fundamentally important. And it's very difficult to get to a place of awareness spiritually and mentally when you don't have the physical energy to do, and you're not providing your body the resources that it needs, the safety that it needs to get there. However, what a lot of women do is they fall into the trap of getting stuck on the physical and they never go further. And so they're just like playing whack-a-mole with symptoms, whack-a-mole with one thing pops up and they just hit it down, whack-a-mole, and then something else pops up, whack-a-mole, and they just keep whack-a-moling their life away, and they're wondering why they're not really feeling better, they're not really growing, they're not really getting to where they want to go, they're unhappy. There's that ravenous hunger about them that just does not get satiated. And sure, maybe your periods get better, or they get more painless, or they feel different, or they make huge improvements, but you're wondering, why are they not getting better? Why is my progesterone not increasing? Or why is my testosterone still low? Or why am I still estrogen dominant? And there's so much more than just the physical to this stuff. And so that's where we're going to start. That's where we're going to end. And we'll continue this story and we'll continue this journey next week. If any links or resources were discussed today, they are included in the show notes, which are linked in the description box below. If you enjoyed the episode and want to support the podcast, please share about it with others, share about it on social media, or like this video and subscribe to the channel. If you want to engage about this episode or you want to deep dive into my process, follow me on Instagram at Jessica Ash Wellness. And if you want to be in on all the Jaw secrets, sign up for my Sunday tea email in the show notes. Thanks for gracing me with your presence, and I'll see you soon. Stay nourished.